In this episode of Rippin In, we say g'day for the very first time. We give you a bit of an intro into who we are and what the bloody hell this podcast is all about, and then we rip straight into our first two season previews for season 2021. We discuss things like can the Broncos recover from the schmozzle that was 2020, and then we go into some of the signings of the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs, and now everybody seems to think that they're going to save the day, but really, will they? Alright, that's enough stuffing around, let's get into it. Hello and welcome.
What the fuck was in between that and behind it?
Hello and welcome to Rippin In, an NRL Unfiltered Podcast with Spencer and also me, Alex.
So if you're wondering who we are, well, we're really just a couple of nobodies. Like every other kid growing up in Australia, just love watching footy. We just thought, hey, we like talking about footy, so maybe there's some people out there that would like to have a little bit of a listen in. So I guess, who are we exactly? So we, been mates now for nearly 13 odd years, I think. About half our lives. And so we grew up in a town about an hour past Brisbane called Rosewood. And we played footy for the mighty Rosewood Roosters. Got pretty close to a grand final one year, but, other than that, there wasn't really much success. Pretty much like my career. I was somewhere between a winger that couldn't really run fast and a second rower that couldn't really tackle. So I was a target for most teams. As for Alex, he wasn't too bad at footy, actually. He made a couple rep sides, but unfortunately the old scapula said no in under 15s, and then since then we've kind of just reserved ourselves to watching footy and drinking beers rather than playing.
So to kind of give you some context of who we used to play against in club footy and with in club footy and rep trial footy, so we had guys like Anthony Milford, Joe Offengowie, Tau Moga, Sam Parcell, and even the Folau brothers who played at the Goodna Eagles in the Ipswich Rugby League. So they're the guys that, we played against. A few of them are still kicking around now. A couple of others have kind of faded away very, very fast. I guess we should probably jump straight into our potential biases because as two blokes doing a footy podcast, obviously they're footy fans. And so I guess I'll recognise that I'm a lifelong Canberra Raiders supporter. Being a Canberra Raiders supporter for me goes back to my dad, who has been a fan of the Raiders since the 80s and 90s, since they were pretty much the surrogate Queensland team back then, right as the Broncos were kicking off, I guess. And I guess I've always been a fan of an underdog, and that's what the Raiders have been for the entirety of the time I've followed them, right up until the last 2 or 3 years. So they haven't actually won a premiership in my lifetime, and following along in the 2000s and 2010s, pretty much any time they got a win was cause for celebration. That's the kind of dire situation that it was in as a Raiders supporter. And now, in the last 3 years, it's reached peak fanfare. As you know, they've reached a grand final and their premiership window is wide open. So I'm really excited about what the 2021 season and beyond can bring for the Canberra Raiders, but definitely do not bring up the 2019 grand final to me because I'm still not over it.
Well, it must be nice to talk about recent success there, Alex, because the Broncos have just done a complete 180 to what the Raiders are doing. The Raiders seem to be building something, and the Broncos seem to be tearing it fucking down, if we're going to be brutally honest. So I go for the Broncos. I moved to Australia from England when I was 8. There were only 2 teams to really go for back then, and it was the Broncos, and then I also enjoyed watching the Cowboys play. 2005, obviously they signed Thurston. The Cowboys went to a grand final that year, so I was, my allegiances were kind of swayed a little bit, and just a massive Jonathan Thurston stan, so I just wanted to see him do well. He was carrying that team. For years and years, I wanted the Broncos to sign Thurston, but we could just never get it done. And yeah, so the 2015 grand final obviously was one of where... No, it wasn't really that anybody could couldn't win in my eyes. Just like nobody could really lose because it's, the Broncos, they'd made it to the grand final. They'd done so well. Like if they'd won, I would have been over the moon. But it's Jonathan Thurston. And we all know how Thurston, before then, the legacy was, can he win one by himself? So he finally got up there with a little help from a little halfback from Brisbane that we will gloss over very quickly. And then, I thought from there that the Broncos actually had a chance to do some good. And since then, they've done nothing. So let's hope that our wooden spoon window is very much closed and our premiership window might be opening. But I don't see the light for at least another 10 years.
And I guess we're going to go a little bit more into that one in this first episode of Rippin In. I got to say, that 2015 grand final was a fucking ripper. I was at the Flying Cock here in Brisbane for that one, and Josh Hannay was there, who was a member of the 2005 grand final, I believe, but they lost, and he was just so emotional, and it was just so great to see the Cowboys get that win after so long in the competition without one. Thoroughly deserved by Jonathan Thurston and poor old Ben Hunt, honestly. So I guess moving on, why are we even doing this podcast? What's it all about? Primarily, I guess, we were just looking for any excuse to talk about more rugby league. So, myself personally, my partner tries to limit me to just 3 or 4 games a week, which frankly I believe is criminal. But now I've got a podcast and I need to watch every game, babe. Sorry. But more seriously, I guess, we're having a bit of a chat about, how we could just love rugby league even more. And we got to thinking maybe there's some other people out there that find value in what we have to say. We started listening to some other podcasts and watching some other media about rugby league, and we started to wonder where we could fit in. And to me, it was glaringly obvious. To both of us, it was glaringly obvious. There's a problem at the moment with most other media outlets and podcasts covering rugby league in that they don't really want to touch on the touchy stuff. Reasons why certain players are just shitting the bed and why teams haven't seen success. There's definitely a lot of kiss-assing for certain players. Whereas in every conversation I think we've ever had about rugby league, we kind of are not afraid to call someone out if they're just playing shit, even if it's a guy on your favourite team and vice versa. And moreover, I guess we understand the game, or we believe we understand the game at a deeper level than what, your NRL on Fox covers. It spends all of 5 minutes talking about a game and it'll just talk about the star player or whatever. But, there's 10 other reasons why that particular team won that game, and we need to delve into that. Is there an unsung hero in this team? Or consequently, is there just a really erosive problem in the team that lost that week? So we don't think that there's another podcast or presenters for any media that are doing this, that are really not afraid to rip in. And the reason we think we can do a better job at that is because we're not a part of the NRL fraternity, and we don't want to be. We don't want to have friends that are NRL players. We don't want to go on Channel 9 or Fox Sports or get paid or, we just want to call rugby league out for its problems and celebrate its successes that sometimes aren't even celebrated. So that's what we're setting out to do, and I think we're going to show you that we can do that.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I think we just we're just trying to sort of find that line between Fletch and Hindy and the humour of rugby league, and then getting into the nuts and bolts of all the stats and the sort of data that goes on behind it. And yeah, really at the end of the day, we're just a couple of blokes who just thoroughly enjoy rugby league, and we want to see the game grow. We want to see the game do well. We don't want to see it to fall like Union has in the last few years. We want it to sort of strive to be closer to AFL or soccer. Here at home. And I think, personally, I love rugby league. Rugby league is my most favourite sport. And this is coming from a kid that grew up in London and, had the Premier League around me. There's nothing quite like rugby league. And that's the thing, though. We think that there are definitely some things that go on in the NRL where the media is too scared, or they maybe have too many vested interests into protecting certain stories or protecting certain people. And, we're not, claiming that we're going to change the world, but we're just going to, whatever sort of comes to our mind, we're just going to talk about it, and hopefully, some people along the way enjoy what they listen to and, learn something from it as well.
And that's not to be confused, I guess, with, some of these media that are very quick to call out every rugby league player for the bullshit that they pull. I mean, even just in the day leading up to this podcast, we've had some Raiders players get done for DUIs, and I think there's been other news stories about the Broncos, both good and bad, but, there's so many journalists that just want to shit on certain players. We're not saying that is wrong or that's what we want to do, but I think there's sometimes people aren't just called out for having poor form. There's some players who are just not living up to the hype or their huge contracts, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody's suggesting that this guy needs to get a punt back to reserve grade. Maybe even not even reserve grade at all. But yeah, I mean, we're going to give it a crack. This is my first ever podcast that you're listening to right now. I've never done this shit before, and I'm certain it's going to be atrocious. We're video recording this as well too, because we want to get it up on YouTube, and I'm absolutely certain if we do end up posting this as a video, so much of this first one is going to be of us looking back at our notes and trying to figure out where the hell we are in our place, because we've got a lot of content prepared for you guys. So bear with us. It will get better. I'm so confident it's going to get better. We know what we're fucking talking about. And even if we don't know what we're talking about, I think there's going to be a few sparks flying backward and forwards, and it'll be fun to watch.
And with that being said, like, we just want to give you a quick little breakdown of how like these podcasts are going to go. So the first 4 episodes that we're going to be putting out is going to be sort of like breaking down like each of the 16 teams like heading into the season. So, you know, let's talk, like, we'll be talking things about what went right or what went wrong in their last season. So, you know, as a Broncos fan, it'll just be what went wrong. You know, like one of the biggest talking points over the off season are player ins and outs. So like what players have gone, like come into a system, what players have gone out, like what does that mean for the team moving forward? Of course, the players that, you know, bring the money and the fans to this end is like X factors. Like who do we think, who are the established X factors? Who do we think might be somebody that could maybe break into being a superstar like into this coming season? So we're going to be doing that just in reverse order from how the ladder finished last year. So, you know, just I think this was a little bit of a like salt in the wounds, but obviously the Broncos will be first. The first time they've been first for the last 3 or 4 years. And, moving on. The Bulldogs, Canterbury Bulldogs, who've had a pretty big off season, as we all have heard about every single day. Obviously the Cowboys, the second best Queensland team, or second worst, however you want to look at it. And then the Manly Sea Eagles, who, you know, I think a lot of people will say severely underperformed last season.
Yeah, and so once we get through those 4 episodes of preseason reviews, we're going to move into a weekly episode from rounds 1 through to the grand final that we're going to divide into thirds. So every week we're going to dedicate 10 minutes to reviewing each game that was in the previous round, previewing every game that's coming up, and then finally an issue affecting rugby league. So again, very important with our previews and reviews, it's not just going to be the same shit that you're going to hear on your Channel 9s and Fox Sports and anything else. You know, yes, you might hear a little bit about our take on the game overall, but then we want to deep dive into some, you know, very obscure reasons why that result, you know, happened, or what the future looks like for a certain team, you know, because these preseason reviews are going to change so wildly coming into, you know, the season. So I think it'll be interesting to keep talking about why is a team performing the way it is, what do they need to change. So we'll dedicate 1/3 to previews, 1/3 to reviews from the season, from the round before, and then the issues affecting rugby league. So in our weekly topics, we've got some pretty juicy stuff cooked up. In this episode, we're going to go into the new rules in the NRL, what we think of them in season 2021, and what other rules we'd like to see. Then we've got some other topics such as the shoulder charge. Can we just fucking bring it back already? You know, the case for an NRL draft, player contracts, you know, how these player options and club options and clubs breaking their contracts because they think somebody's a piece of crap 2 years into their 5-year deal. It's just become an absolute schmozzle. What's some other ones that we have?
The concussion protocol as well, like something that teams seem to be exploiting a little bit over the years. You know, there's a little bit of a grey area of, you know, free interchange is obviously worth so much to like teams, especially in this, you know, more modernised, like faster game of footy. And on both sides of it, like we definitely saw it in Origin this past season as well with both Boyd Cordner and Cam Munster. It can be a massive turning point. So like definitely something that I want to talk about is, you know, how do we sort of like find the line between putting out a good product, but then also making sure that we protect our players as well. And then another one as well is just, you know, the big money clubs, like the glamour clubs. Like, how do we get the smaller teams that don't really have much of a financial backing and aren't maybe in the best of places, you know, like a New Zealand Warriors or a Canberra Raiders? How do we sort of create parity and help them compete with the Sydney Roosters and the Melbourne Storm and actually make it a fair competition where every single year you aren't sure who's going to win? And you're not really sure, like, you know, for the last few years, at least for me, it's the top four has always had either the Storm or the Roosters. and I guess even to a certain point recently, the Parramatta Eels as well. So like, how do we sort of create parity in rugby league and make it so that, you know, your team definitely has a shot to not necessarily win the premiership, but to make the top 8 and to be competitive each year.
All right, we've got all the admin side of things out of the way. We've introduced you to what our podcast is going to be all about. So without further ado, it's time to rip in. First off the blocks, we've got the Brisbane Broncos. So I guess I'll throw over to you, Spencer. What did you make of their season? What the fuck went wrong?
Yeah, mate. What a season. What a season. Honestly, I follow a lot of sports across the world and across codes, and dead set for any team that I've supported, this is probably the worst season I've had as a fan. It, like, the first two weeks pre-COVID, seems weird to think, you know, like before COVID, we're going great. We're 2-0. Like, we had a fantastic win against the Cowboys. Dave Fafita looked fantastic. Tavita Pangai Jr., again, like rocks or diamonds, but on that particular night, he was diamonds. And the new recruit, Brodie Croft, looked pretty good as well. Flow then into week 2, Wayne Bennett, Rabbitohs at Suncorp. I'm pretty sure the stadium was empty because that was the first proper COVID sort of, you know, like, oh, we've got to like keep everywhere. So it was weird. Like, you know, I remember Sam Burgess and Wayne Bennett sitting in pretty much where we sat as season members in the 2019 season, about 10 rows back behind the posts. And I thought, there's no way the Broncos are winning this game. And Anthony Milford, you know, had that unbelievable try that was about, 80 meters long, like pretty much went through every single player in the team. And then what was kind of lost, because obviously after that week, we went into the COVID break, was Dave Fafita got injured. And he did his knee. And that was something that I think at that stage, when we thought Origin was going to be in June, July, so there's no way he's making Origin. That was a massive blow for the Broncos because we didn't get him back until well after play resumed from COVID. And since then, like, look, I came up with every excuse in the book for the Broncos last year. They're just, from the very top all the way down, something just wasn't there. And it wasn't even one thing, just a lot of things weren't there. Like, it was almost this weird thing where in American sports they talk about rebuilding. So, you know, you rebuild, you tear it all down, so in the next year you get like high picks in the draft, or you've got like good players coming off contract you can sort of bring in and you start fresh. In the NRL, it's a little bit harder to do that because obviously like players want to win and they want to be getting paid money, so it's sort of something that you've constantly got to keep on rolling over. Like Melbourne and Sydney have been so great at, as you know, that continued success. The Broncos were well and truly in a rebuilding year last year, but I don't think anybody knew, including the CEO, the coach, the players, because Seibold was brought in there to win. Like, he had a fantastic year with the Rabbitohs in 2018, right? And at the time, I was all for it. I was all for Seas. I was like, fuck yeah. Like, I remember I got my other like season pass like that year. Like, I got a photo with me and my old roommate with Anthony Seibold. I just like shook his hand and I said, oh man, I'm so happy to see it. It's going to be a great season. And that first year was all right. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. But I remember like one thing sort of they said was Wayne Bennett's system is super easy to understand for the players, and Anthony Seibold's system is inherently more difficult for the players to sort of like understand. And like what I wasn't thinking at that time was, what are they talking about? Like, at its purest form, like rugby league isn't soccer. It's not NFL. Like, there's no like sort of intricacies. It's really just about like putting forward a plan. It's like, just like get through your set of 6, tackle well in your set of 6, and just make sure you have somebody to control the game. So that first season I was sort of chalking. I was like, oh, you know, like obviously we had that terrible game against Parramatta Eels, lost 54-0 in the finals, and we brought it over to the next year. And I was like, all right, this is the year. And just none of the players bought in to Siebes. Like, whatever happened between week 2 and then the start back from COVID, like players came back out of shape, players came back unmotivated. Darius Boyd, I don't really want to get too much into this, but like, if there's been a more dismal captain for the Brisbane Broncos in the last 20 years, I'd like to fucking know who that is, because it was just every single week he would just show you how little he wanted to be there. And I get it. He was collecting a paycheck. But just fuck off. Just fuck off. Like, Cameron Smith, the greatest of all time, had the decency to like let them up, just to say like, oh, there's nothing to do with retirement. I just want to get through this season. The main goal is a premiership. Darius Boyd should have retired a year ago. He waited until about 3 or 4 weeks into the season last year to say, oh, I'm retiring at the end of the year. Can you retire now? Could you retire now? Because all that happened for the rest of that year is that we had Darius Boyd playing some fullback, we had him playing some 5'8", we've had him playing some center. We're trying to move him around to figure out how he could work in this team, but we were never going to get to the 8. So him moving around made no sense, right? Because he's just taking up the spot of somebody else. Like, Anthony Milford was injured for a lot of the season, and that hurt because I would have loved to have seen him and Dearden together. But that couldn't work either. And the fact that Darius Boyd was there just like occupying a spot in the 17, it just didn't allow us to like try different players there. And I know we didn't really have much. And one of Seabold's biggest excuses was every week, oh, this is the best 17 that I can put out on paper. Well, like the 17 on paper looked pretty good to me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I guess some people are now calling it a rebuilding year, but I don't know if the Broncos organisation ever saw it as a rebuilding year. Maybe the players in their mind thought it was and just fucking clocked off because, yeah, it was an abysmal season in every way, shape and form. You know, if you talk about that 56-0 drubbing in season 2019, that was kind of an unexpected game. Like when they got smashed 56-0, that was only 2 or 3 weeks after they'd actually just beaten the Eels at Suncorp, right? So that was a bit of a blip on the radar for the Broncos, but everyone, including most fans and probably even yourself and myself, expected them to probably be in the 8 again and most likely improve. They had a young squad, and everyone knew they had a young squad, but some verified superstars in that team, some guys on big contracts, so what it's supposed to be superstars. So I don't think anybody had a rebuilding year in their mind, and I don't think the Broncos organisation throughout the 20 rounds of the 2020 season ever thought of it like that, which is why they were still, shifting around Darius Boyd because they were like, what can we do to win or whatever. I agree. Massive mistake. They needed to get Darius Boyd out of that team, let alone into positions where they actually need to find some consistency. Somebody who's going to take that position, even if they're not great straight away, but who's going to take that position and stick with it, which is what I think they're trying to do with Dearden, because he's been pretty good. Not game-changingly amazing yet, but if they stick with him, he very well could be. But yeah, last season, what did you have? You had a coach that the players didn't seem to buy into, or more importantly, he brought in apparently this crazy game plan and this complexity of a game plan that just threw all these young kids off, which is kind of the opposite of what you were saying there before, where, the rugby league game is actually quite a simple game. If you can complete your sets, dominate possession, dominate field position, you're probably going to win. And he was trying to overcomplicate it. So maybe that had an impact. But yeah, you had no leaders in the team because they'd let so many of their leaders go in the last few years without building a proper, cache of players to take their place as leadership. You can't have Matt Lodge in your leadership team after he's only been there for like all of 2 seasons and under very, not ideal circumstances. Not a lot of people still love him. Then you had, superstars who didn't fire. Clearly an ego problem in those young players. They just flat out gave up. That was the worst part about the end of last season with the Broncos, is they flat out gave up. They never stood a chance of winning any of those final 13 games or whatever it was they lost. It was just embarrassing. It was so tough to watch.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like looking back on it now, like you talk about like the leaders. That's like a big point that I wanted to bring up, is that in the 2015 grand final year, that team, like, it was stacked, but it wasn't like, there were still guys in there that like look at any like old NRL grand final team, and there's always like a few guys there that are plotters, essentially, right? Like guys that are just simply there to, like, if you're a front row forward and you can play 20 minutes, that means that you're making sure that Josh Papali only has to play 60 minutes. You know what I mean? That's how it kind of works with these guys. And, the Broncos had, I'm pretty sure, Mitchell Dodds playing off the bench. Like we had, an aging Sam Thaiday, an aging Corey Parker, an aging Justin Hodges, an aging Jack Reed, like a fairly recent Corey Oates, and we had Darius Boyd, who I will say he was a very good fullback, but he was never a fullback that relied on his speed. It was always his passing, it was always his vision. And more to the point, as a player, he was never an alpha. Darius Boyd was never an alpha male. He's always like a beta male. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But the issue is that when Corey Parker left, when Sam Thaiday left, when Justin Hodges left, like when these guys that were sort of like, they were like Sam Thaiday to me and Corey Parker, they had 2 like embodiments of Brisbane Broncos players. Like, not just like he played for the Brisbane Broncos and he was a really good player. It's like when I look at those two guys, like it immediately brings back memories to days where the Broncos would, break the record for like the most amount of tackles inside their 20 or something like that against the Melbourne Storm, and they'd eke out an 8-6 win in Melbourne. And they just did that through pure grit. Like Andy McCulloch was making 75 tackles in a game. It was fantastic. Then Pangai Jr., David Fafita, Payne Haas, Patrick Carrigan, all these awesome young forwards that we had. There was a gap, about 1 or 2 years, between those old heads retiring and these new guys coming in. So there was nobody to sort of show them the way and sort of help build them up. And it was this thing where Tavita Pangai came in and it's like, oh, hey, mate, you're going to be the next Sam Thaiday. Oh, okay. Payne Haas comes in. You're going to be the next Petro. Oh, how do they do that? How do they just these are kids that from the ages of probably under 12 who've just been absolutely annihilating every kid that they've ever played against. Probably been a bigger, stronger, faster than most of them. What happens when that athleticism gap, so to say, closes and you're not the fastest, you're not the biggest, you're not the strongest anymore? Like, that's where guys like Sam Thaiday and Corey Parker made their money, because they were never the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest blokes on the field, but they just had so much fucking dig. So much dig. Like, you watch those two play Origin. And if I was a Blues fan, I'd fucking hate them. And I know that they did, because I hated Paul fucking Gap. But they were just they were grubs. They were grubs. We'll put it that way. And I'm not saying that the Broncos need to start getting dirty. They just need to just be like trying to play for something a little bit more. And like, I fucking love Patrick Carrigan. Like, he is the future. I think he's already captained the Broncos. I think maybe 1 or 2 games last year he captained them. 160 meters a game, 50 tackles, and at the end of the game he's the only one trying. Fuck, we got to get him some help though. Because that's who you want to, that's not a guy that you build your team around. That's a guy that used to complement the sort of foundation that you have around. And at the moment, we just flat out don't have that.
It's just these interim leaders that, maybe are not what, you couldn't replace the Hodges and the Parker and the Thaiday. You couldn't. Not straight away, or unless you had a better plan, which the Broncos clearly didn't. So there was a couple of people that could have been interim leaders, at the very least a bit more seasoned than some of these other young guys. So Joe Gowie had been around for a few extra years, played Origin. I guess Matt Lodge, as controversial as he is, big fucking guy and old. Old as hell compared to the rest of the Broncos team. So him, Lodge, Alfred Gowie, Darius Boyd, that's who they needed to take the team by a scruff of the neck and show them the way. None of them did it. Joe Gowie, I've never seen a worse regression of a top-tier talent in a single season. I can't think of a worse one. I can't think of one. I think he just had the wrong attitude last year. Maybe, again, he was rubbed up the wrong way by somebody. I know there was a bit of a falling out there with Kevin Walters, but I don't know what his problem was in the meantime. Lodge didn't play, and obviously didn't assert his, aggression that we know he has, such as New York City, and grab some players by the scruff of the neck and let them know, this isn't the way, boys, pull your fucking head in. And then, of course, Darius Boyd. I think you're right. He was still a top-tier talent in 2015, and then over the last 2 or 3 years, a really quick drop-off of the skills that made him a really good finisher and a really good winger, fullback, probably better winger than a fullback, to be honest with you. And he just drove that team into the ground. Instead of being a leader and even taking a step back and saying, I'm not playing my best footy, I'm not going to play, but I'm still obviously contracted, that's cool. I'll nurture, I'll sit in the background, something like a Sia Soliola does in many cases. He doesn't expect to play in the 17 all the times. He's just well respected in the group and leads the way. That guy's the fittest player on the Raiders team, and he's 39 or something. 79. But Darius Boyd just chose a paycheck. He chose to keep playing. He's probably ruined his legacy, chose a paycheck for an extra year, and insisted on still playing on the footy field. He's like, I think I'm still good enough to be here. Couldn't just face reality that he wasn't up to grade. And I think that was, if he's not leading the way, and if that guy's shit and he's still playing, why do I need to play good? So it was just a chicken and an egg situation, I think, in so many ways. What led to this downfall was actually that, but that was infected by this, and just a cycle of just negativity, lack of accountability, poor performance, and the Broncos' culture of old seems to have just disappeared into thin air.
Yeah, and that's it, hey, especially with that culture. It's such an elusive term in sports. It's you can't really... you don't really know how to describe it, but when you see it, you know what it is. And yeah, like I think you've hit the nail on the head with Darius Boyd, where I get it, you're getting paid, why not keep on getting paid? You're on good money, but if you're not going to play up to an $800,000 or $850,000 contract, then in my honest, you deserve to be ridiculed for it. And especially as well, like some of the way that he handled some of the things, and particularly like one thing that I will say that really, really rubbed me off the wrong way was the last game of the season when we just have the worst season in the Broncos history. He's out on the field kicking that fucking baby reveal thing, but like, could you? And I go to these footy play. Could you not have seen how that would have looked for, I don't know, the entire fan base? Like you're doing it in the middle of the field after we just got beat by the Cowboys. The fucking Cowboys couldn't even beat the Cowboys at the end of the season in our own stadium. We were ahead with 20 minutes to go. Just Darius, do that in the locker room. Like we had 3 wins this season. We had 1 after COVID. We had as many baby reveals after COVID for the Broncos as we did wins. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that really pissed. But I'm getting away from that. He's gone. His money off the fucking books. We've also got Jack Bird's money off the fucking books. He's gone for this year. He's gone to the Dragons. He's playing lock. The position that I wanted Jack Bird to play for the Broncos when we signed him. I will say for Jack Bird, like a little bit disappointed that I never got to see him play more than I think 5 or 6 games unless getting injured. Like I think at the start of last season, he was being tipped as a fullback. I strongly believe that Broncos team would have looked a lot better with Jack Bird at the back, a lot more mongrel. Darius would have been able to play center, would have been much more protected in attack, would have been able to defend more, which is what he was good at more in the season. But the only thing I hope for Jack Bird is that he's back to his like childhood club at the Dragons. I hope he stays healthy. I hope ACLs are always a tough thing to come back from, and hopefully like all the luck that he's had the last few years just came from being at the Broncos and nothing more. I'd love to see him just continue his career down south. We also lost Joe Offa. Again, you touched on it like earlier. You go online and you have a look at his stats from 2017, 2018, 2019, and last year. It's just a downward trend. One of those guys we needed to step up and to, be the alpha of the forward pack. And I think he just kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit because although he's a great player, I think he agrees as well that I think probably Patrick Carrigan, Payne Haas, David Fafita, and Pangai Jr. still better footy players. Not a bad thing. Like obviously, like he's still good enough to be playing in the NRL. Like the West Tigers, like I think he's a great signing there. Like him and Tamau, I think will go really well as their forward pack. But you could just tell that his time was up with the Broncos. I think that's a good move. Like I heard that he was a little bit, pissy about how things went. And apparently, like Kevy brought him into his office and told him he wasn't needed. At the end of the day, like if you didn't want that to happen, like just play better. Like I get it. Like the Broncos had a shit season. Carrigan and Haas still played pretty fucking well. Payne Haas still made Origin. Carrigan still made the Origin 25 or 28 side. Like Xavier Coates still made the Origin side, albeit because there was just every other winger was just shot dead. But it was like he just played shit. So I'm glad that he's gone. Sean O'Sullivan went to the Warriors. Like at one point he looked pretty good. He had like I think 1 or 2 decent games. But like all halfbacks recently, the Broncos just a turnstile. Like you're in there for a couple of weeks, and as soon as you play or the team plays bad, you're made the scapegoat, and you just back into Reggie's. And then I guess obviously the big one is Fafita. We lost him to the Titans, no less as well. Very big money, like 1.3 mil a year over 3 years. Look, like in terms of what he offers on the field, massive loss. Like the best player for us. Like even in the 5 games he played last year, he was still easily the best player on the park every single time he played. What more can we say about this kid at this stage? Like that's it. He's still a kid. He's only like 20 or 21. He's about 6'3", 6'4", 110 kilos, and he can outrun centers. He's just like I will say, like I think, and this is not because he's left the Broncos and like that I now hate the Titans or anything like that. The Titans overpaid for him. I understand where the Broncos were coming from, not wanting to pay him $1.3 million. And I also get where Fafita is coming from. And like he gets it. Like I know what Fafita's doing. Like we don't want to make any friends of NRL players or anything like that. But he's going to go to the Gold Coast, get himself a nice little bit of coin for the next 3 years, and then his Broncos are going to start playing well again, and he's just going to come back to Brisbane, and all will be forgotten. It's going to be fine because we'll get into it another time. But the Titans are just going to fucking flop this year anyway. So, but no, that's like Fafita gone. Leaves a massive hole in our team, and
it's the greatest disrespect of, or at least like the comeuppance of what has been going on with the Broncos, whether their culture and their performance, the fact that he left. I think if it was still a good place to be around your mates and other young superstars, you'd have stayed. If the Broncos were playing well and had an upside, you'd have stayed. I don't think he would have left for an extra couple of 100,000 if he thought that the Broncos was the place to be. I think they've got a couple of dark years coming up, and that's why he left, and maybe you'll be right, he'll come back. I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to change for that to happen. And then, the worst part, so you lose David Fafita, that's a huge kick in the teeth, but the worst part is they haven't replaced him. There's one guy that I think could, unknown yet, but if you're talking about like outs that you've lost and people you've actively signed to come into this team, it's a fucking joke. Honestly, their marquee signing of this 2021 off-season is John Asiata. And look, don't get me wrong, John Asiata is a decent rugby league player. I like him. He's obviously super versatile. I think at the Cowboys over the last season or two, he's played second row, lock, front row, hooker, 5'8", maybe halfback. He's played backs, forwards, like pivotal roles in this team. But I think it's testament that the Cowboys were willing to let him go. Maybe he got paid better money at the Broncos, I would imagine. But the Cowboys were willing to let him go when he has plugged so many vital holes for them and probably didn't quite get the job done. He showed a few flashes of brilliance in maybe the 5'8" role, but overall, okay. And then the Broncos have snapped him up, and he's now going to be their starting 13, I think. I think they're going to move Carrigan into second row. I don't know. The chat is this guy they've signed is going to be in the run-on side, and he's not the solution. So that's their big signing. In addition to John Asiata, you've got David Mead, an old bloke who played at the Broncos in 1996. But all I'm saying is he played at the Broncos a long time ago. He hasn't played in NRL standard football in a number of years, and they've thought, yes, that's what we need, another winger. I think the Broncos have got a few of those. You got Albert Kelly. Again, couldn't make it in the NRL. Apparently he had some good seasons in the Super League, but he couldn't make it in the NRL, and as soon as he's come back, he couldn't even train with the NRL squad because he was so fucking fat. So there's your top three. Do they bring in one other person? I don't know. But all I'm saying is they got no one to the standard of David Fafita. And just to touch on the guy that I think can do a David Fafita-esque job, that is, of course, Jordan Riki. I think we saw him for 4 games last season, 5 games. And honestly, I did like what I saw. He's not as big as Fafita yet. He's pretty ripped if you follow the beak. But the guy's ripped. He's probably a little bit more mobile than Fafita. When you're that big, you just lose that little bit of agility or, speed. So I think that Riki would probably have him there. It's just not as damaging because he doesn't have, the size behind him as yet. But he looks really good. I think they need to get him as much game time as possible. If he's not in the 17, let alone in the starting squad for round 1 of this year, the Broncos still haven't sorted this shit out. That's just my honest opinion. He is potentially their new star, particularly when guys like Tavita Pangai Jr., still hot and cold, still a bit of a rat bag. Patrick Carrigan's a bit more of a toiler. Yes, he gets some good stats up in there, but not as the damaging runner as a Fafita and so on and so forth. So they need someone like Riki in that forward pack. So if they're not going to use him, I just don't understand.
Yeah. I think from every podcast here on out, I'm only going to be referring to Jordan Riki as Big Sexy, for obvious reasons. You were I'm going to know about that last in, and I'm not going to give you any dramas for this because it was Andrew McCulloch.
Oh,
he left, then he came back, but he's but he's injured. And we're already, like, the Dragons tried to get him, and the Broncos couldn't agree with the Dragons how much money they were going to pay for Andrew McCulloch. So, like, this is what I like. How do you get players to buy in when a guy like Andrew McCulloch, who, like, when we did get rid of him, I think rather unceremoniously for what he's done for this club, particularly for, like, you got to remember he's a premiership, a grand final playing hooker, and a guy that if you needed 65 tackles and no nonsense for 80 fucking minutes, he'd give you 85 minutes. He was just like the epitome of what a hooker should be. And in any other era but the Cameron Smith era, he would have been a great guy. Seabold fucks him off to Newcastle. He gets hurt, and then he comes back to Brisbane because the Knights don't want to pay him the money that's left on his contract, but he had a clause where he could come back and the Broncos could pay him. So rather than the Broncos just going, let's try to rebuild this culture, right? We'll just help you with your rehab, pay out the rest of your contract, and then if you find somewhere you want to go, fair enough. What do they do immediately? They try to shop him out. But the same drama, With the other three that we've brought in, just David Mead, like, his depth at best, right? That's all he's really there for. Like, okay, Albert Kelly, maybe that was to make some kind of headline. I don't know. Like, one thing I will say with Asiata, and this is 100% my Brisbane Broncos bias coming in and me trying to put him up on a pedestal. If everything else is going well, that's a lot of ifs. At the moment, if there's 17 ifs, we haven't solved any of them yet. But if 16 other ifs are sorted out and he can come in as either the guy off the bench or even as the number 13, and he almost becomes we have seen a massive increase in the guys like Victor Radley and the Cheese, Brandon Smith, where they can play hooker and they can tackle, but they can also run the footy as well. And the thing that I was saying earlier about the plotters is that it's not necessarily about what they offer, it's about what they allow everybody else to do, because they can suck up 25, 30 tackles a game and 10 runs in 100 meters, you know what I mean? And, having a false ball player, like just out the back, just takes so much pressure off your halves, which is what we kind of need at the moment. But again, there's a reason why he became available, because the Cowboys didn't want him. And like you said, he's a jack of all trades, but is he a master of any of them? That's, to be confirmed. And he won a premiership with the Cowboys, if I'm not mistaken. But it wasn't despite him, but it certainly wasn't because of him either. He was just there. And that's the thing. The Broncos aren't really in this, we're trying to sign plotters just to fill out our roster. It's genuinely everybody that's on our playing list right now, if you play well enough, you could be starting for us for the next 5 years. We're in this sort of dire straits. And that, again, there's technically a fifth in because Kevy's back. Kevy Walters, he's back. He's finally here. He's come home. Boy, I bet he wish he came a couple years earlier. Jesus Christ. He was the halves coach for the Broncos when we made the grand final. Apparently, he was one of the reasons why Ben Hunt and Anthony Milford was doing so well. Kevy Walters can't play 15 other positions on the field, though, can he? And I'm worried because what has happened to that team when he was being earmarked for that job as Bennett's assistant, and then they had a bit of a falling out, and then he left and went to the Queensland job, and now that he's back, is we've just lost everybody that was even worth anything, or anybody that we do still have, like Anthony Milford, just aren't really playing up to par. He has a big season ahead of him, and I think that is the biggest question mark over the Brisbane Broncos moving forward. Is it's not a can we make the 8? It's a can we buy into Kevy? Can Kevy show us enough where I'm not expecting anything more than 5 wins. But what I am expecting is 80 minutes of footy every single week. And I'm expecting one of the top 4 teams will upset them at Suncorp. They'll have a couple of guys out, they'll think they're going to get us, and we'll just squeak over. We'll just get one of those, those famous underdog, gritty, sort of wins. But other than that, I very much think that this year has got to be okay, what did we do wrong last year? We had guys playing out of position just to sort of have them in the team, and we had guys here, there, and everywhere. Let's bring these guys in and just say, hey, Herbie Farnworth, you're going to be playing centre for the first 5 games of the season. Don't give me a reason to drop you. Give him 5 games. If he plays well, keep him in there. If not, who else do we have? You know what I mean? Like Xavier Coates, like show me growth, show me progression. Like Tom Dearden, like show us that not only you can become the halfback that we know you can be, that you can help Anthony Milford become the guy that he is. And that's the dramas we're in right now. We're putting a lot of faith into a 22-year-old halfback to lead this team around again. But those are situations you put yourself into when you run high up into the salary cap year after year, chasing a premiership, and then rather than realizing that the wheels are falling off, that, oh no, like we're getting closer, and then what happens is everything falls out from under itself, and now we're stuck with Andrew McCulloch's contract, and we're stuck with paying half of Jack Bird's contract, and we only just got out of Darius Boyd's contract, and we've still got to pay Milford $1 million this season. And honestly, like this could have almost been its own episode, just like Spencer's deep dive into the Brisbane Broncos, because it really is just like it's.
Yeah, I think, look, there's so much to unpack about the fall from grace that has been the Brisbane Broncos in 2020. But I think a word that you use there, progression. The Brisbane Broncos need to see some progress from even their superstars this season in order to be competitive. I'm not really too concerned about their forward pack. I think there was some ego problems and even just effort problems there. But I think there's some top-tier forwards in that team. But the backs, even their superstars, have got some fucking growing to do. I'll rapid fire through some of these for you. So Katoni Stagg's like an unbelievable threat in attack. Just he's so quick off the mark. He's so strong. It's just like unbelievable. Defensively, can get made to look like a fool. And that's the problem. I think he was going to make the New South Wales team until he got injured. But there were some Queenslanders that were absolutely salivating at that prospect purely because his defense isn't up to scratch yet. And he can go missing from time to time. So there's Katoni. Xavier Coates. I feel for this guy to an extent because he has been put under so much pressure of expectation so soon as in his career. People are just comparing him to Greg Inglis and, he's such an athlete. He's so tall. But he's really error-prone. He's being talked about for this huge contract that I honestly believe he's going to take somewhere else away from the Broncos and just fail because he's going to be expected to be a killer. And at the moment, the best I've seen from Xavier Coates is as a finisher, which is pretty much standard as an NRL winger. If you can't finish a try in a corner, like you're not a winger. And he can do that. That's great. But under high balls, hard yards out of the 20-meter zone, some of that stuff, I still think he's got a long way to go, and he's just getting these comparisons that's going to really make it tough for him to live up to. And it could force him out of the league prematurely, as it has with many other so-called superstars, in their first season or two of footy. Then, of course, you've got Anthony Milford. And you just talked before about Dearden needing to be the leader from half. And that's embarrassing that he has to be the leader at 21-22 when Milford should be the leader by now. And I think it's also embarrassing that he's being considered for the captaincy because apparently Kevy brings out the best in him or whatever. I don't know. But going off his performance since the 2015 grand final, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, the bloke's not maturing. He doesn't lead from the front. He goes missing in big-time situations. He makes wrong play calls every time. From all accounts, he's a lazy trainer. I don't see him taking many of the losses that the Broncos are having to heart on the field. He just kind of seems to zombie through these games. And so Milford, for me, has not lived up to that huge price tag. He should be the leader. He is not the leader. He is not a leader. And if they don't see absolute brilliance from him every game of this season, this is brilliance every game. If they don't see that, he won't be at the Broncos next year. He'll probably get a decent paycheck somewhere else for someone taking a gamble on him because I think the NRL's in a little bit of a halves, drought at the moment. There's only really a few superstars and then there's a lot of up-and-comers. So maybe someone will pay him somewhere, but he's not worth much at the moment. I think if we're just going to throw a random number out there for a contract worth, realistically, that's a $300,000 player. Not even a $400,000, I need to see more from him, and hopefully Kevy can bring that out in him.
Like, it's literally that simple with Milford. I don't want to waste too much time on it. That if he wants to command the amount of money, even close to the amount of money he's on this year for next year, he has to fucking drag that Broncos team into the top 8. And I'm going to predict right now, I'm going to say right now, the projected finish, that we will not finish higher than 14th unless 2015 Anthony Milford shows up. That's the only way. Like, that Anthony Milford in round 2 against the Rabbits last year that was scoring 80-meter dazzling tries. Like, unless that guy shows up, we're not going to do it. Because, like, don't get me wrong, like, we have a fantastic and, like, lost in all of these, like, you know, X factors and superstars and stuff. Like, Payne Haas, Patrick Carrigan, Tavita Pangai Jr., Jake Turpin. Like, these are all guys that are just fantastic. And, like, when they're on their top form, they're fucking fantastic. But they play positions where, like, Payne Haas pretty much goes 200 meters every single game. It doesn't matter when the other 12 guys aren't really getting much go forward. Like, Patrick Carrigan is making 50 tackles a game. That's because we never have the ball. And he's just got to fucking tackle his dick off all game long. Like, you need a fullback, you need a strike weapon in the backs, you need a strike weapon on the edge, and you need, like, a half that is going to control the game, and then you need a half that's going to break open the game. You look at any of the top 4 sides or the top sides, and you immediately think to Pappenhausen, Munster, Whiten, fucking Charmsy, Tedesco, Cleary, but Keary for the Roosters, Cleary for Panthers, Jerome Luai, like guys that like they just have their dedicated role. They know what they're doing, and that's what Dearden needs to control the game. He needs to be the backbone. He needs to kick well. He needs to pass when he needs to pass. He needs to attack the line when he needs to attack the line.
I guess that for me is the key to the Broncos. Maybe not success this year, but at least better fortunes is the halves. If they can control the game, manage the game, and get a little bit creative with the footy, then they can feed that ball to the backs. And to be honest, maybe I'm even being really, really tough on those backs because of the inabilities of the Broncos halves, the backs didn't really get to shine heaps. So again, that's the X factor for the Broncos. If the halves can fire and get the ball to those outside backs, I think they can see a lot more tries in 2021. So to wrap up for me, I definitely think this is going to be another tough year for the Broncos. I don't think their season's going to be anything to write home about. An improvement, but not amazing. I think they'll go up to 14th on the ladder. So all the best to them. I hope that we can see a lot better out of the Broncos because I'm at every bloody game and I want to see a competitive game of footy.
Yeah, I will say, I think the same. 14th for the Broncos. I'm not sure. I can never remember how many games that a player can get away with playing the year before until he's not considered a rookie. It's around 4 or 5. If it's 5, Big Sexy will get Dally M Rookie of the Year in a fucking landslide. Because A, he's big, and B, he's sexy. But yeah, I think this is just simply a year of like let's rediscover who we are as the Brisbane Broncos. You know, like let's put a few pieces in place and let's get rid of these ridiculous expectations of it's first or last.
There you have it, folks. 14th on the ladder from both Spencer and I. And that wraps up the Broncos for 2021. All the best to them. Let's take a look at the Canterbury Bulldogs. All right, so Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs. Look, I don't think people expected much from them last season. They had a lot of shit happen before even the season kicked off. Obviously, some issues in Coffs Harbour with a couple of players. Then they lost their main sponsor, and their roster was never really much to write home about anyway. The thing with the Canterbury Bulldogs is they're actually one of the most successful teams in rugby league history, particularly because they're not one of the oldest clubs either, in comparison to your Easts and whatever else. But this is a team that actually has won a lot of premierships and almost cyclically goes through cycles of success and absolute trash. So let's even look at the last 2 decades. So I don't know too much about them in the early 2000s. Won the premiership in 2004. I think they had a salary cap scandal in the early 2000s. Yeah. So they were up there. And then because they were cheating, they had to restructure. I think they went to the absolute bottom for a time there. Maybe came back for another grand final, which they lost to. And then They won another one in 2012. Did they? No.
They got to the grand final in 2012 against the... No. So 2015, they lost against the Rabbits. No, 2014, they lost to the Rabbits. And they lost as well to the Storm in grand final because the James Graham bit Billy Slater's ear. It was like 10 weeks.
So, yeah, they have some years of success, and then they cyclically go back down to the bottom of the ladder, which is where they find themselves currently. So, weak roster, I think, are particularly in, absolutely essential spots in the roster. So, the spine, so I don't think their fullback was very clear. They rotated through a lot of halves. Number 9's also not a superstar by any way, shape, or form. So, I think the Bulldogs performed as expected last season. I don't know if there's too much more to say about that. As far as their outs go, they probably made some good moves there by letting go Kieran Foran as an example. Look, the man used to be an absolute killer. He's not that man anymore. So I think absolutely the best move to just, get rid of that dead weight and start rebuilding. They also had Aiden Tolman, which was just the plotter's plotter. Like, if there's a bloke that's, the middle of the slow and go kind of forwards, that's what Aiden Tolman was. And I don't think he was the leader of their pack either. They brought in Raymond for Taylor Mariner, who obviously started becoming the absolute, the engine of that powerhouse. So, they let go of these guys. Jack Cogger, who was one of those halves they tried a couple of times, didn't really work out. So they've got rid of some of the guys I don't think they're going to really need anymore. And can they do better this year? Remains to be seen. I think there's been a lot of hubbub about them in this off-season, particularly the players that they have picked up and a new coach in Trent Barrett, of course. Honestly, I think overly so. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting sort of segue for me to go from the Broncos to the Bulldogs because watching a fair few Bulldogs games last year, the effort on the field was there. Like you said, they were devoid of talent, really. I'm a big fan of rugby league, but to try to name every single player off the top of my head, particularly for a team like the Bulldogs, is very hard. But I can think of, when Luke Thompson came over from England, he had the COVID up. When he came on, he looked decent. But again, did he look decent because of the team that he was in or because he's actually a good player? Josh Jackson has always just been a very, roll up your sleeves, clock in, clock out type of guy that just gets the dirty work done that nobody else really wants to do, which when they go to grand finals and they have those really strong teams, like you said, the history of the Bulldogs, I don't hate the Bulldogs, but I definitely don't love them. And I think the reason because of that is even in the situation they were in last year, you got to show up because the Rabbitohs didn't show up towards the end of last season and the Bulldogs beat them. That was a fantastic game of footy and I was rooting for them because you love to see the underdog get up over them. And it's crazy. I was rooting for them even though it cost the Broncos a wooden spoon. But where they are now is where I hope the Broncos will be at the end of this season because they proved that they were performing way above their fucking pay packets and what was on the roster. And I think everybody would say the Bulldogs played a great brand of footy, yet they only finished with 3 wins. So that sort of shows you that with probably easily, I don't think there's any contest to this, the worst roster in the NRL, they still scrubbed off 3 wins, which is a lot more to say than the Cowboys or the Eagles or the Broncos, you know what I mean? Teams that had that talent there. And then you look at some of the guys that they've brought in. Obviously, Aiden Tolman's gone, the plotter's plotter, right? In a team that's doing well, a great addition. To a team that's maybe not, probably better to just flick him off and see what you've got in-house, right? Shake things up a little bit. But I know you probably didn't want to bring this up, but of course, they've brought in Nick Kotrick from the start of this season. For those of you who may not know, he's a center-winger hybrid from the Raiders. Has never met a tackle. He hasn't liked to break. He did play New South Wales this year. It was in the was in the training squad, the 28, the center squad. Yeah. And again, he's for the money they're paying him, again, same with the feeder thing, the Raiders are probably okay with not having to pay him that money because for that's I would say it is a luxury position, I guess, a center winger hybrid. I think the big one that I'd like to touch up on is I think Kyle Flanagan. I think that's a pretty pretty shrewd signing. Like I know for a fact, like, and Alex touched on a second, like that he thinks pretty highly of Flanagan, if not higher than what I did. Like from what I saw last year, I didn't think he was I don't think the Roosters were winning any games because of him. Like, I don't think that he was necessarily terrible. I didn't think that he was as good as what he was sort of being lauded to. But to get him for the deal that they've got him on, and for the type of situation that they're in, it's a no-brainer. Like, it's a fantastic signing, and it's a perfect blend for a young team of a guy that can help you grow because he's young. He's shown, like, we know he's got potential, but he's also, like, proven himself a little bit in the early going as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, Kyle Flanagan, I don't think is a top 10 halfback. However, I don't think he did anything wrong last season. Again, I don't pay a particular amount of attention to the Roosters. Frankly, I fucking hate the Roosters. But I thought the Roosters brought him in to take over Cooper Cronk, or the role that Cooper Cronk played. And yeah, they didn't lose any games because of him. He played his role and still super young. I think sometimes we forget just how young some of the players are in our league because they've already been around for so many years. You would forget that Nick Kotrick's only 21 or 22 now, maybe, because he's been around for 4 years. And you forget that Kyle Flanagan's 21. And you forget that these guys are 21. But he is still super young. And they brought him in. And you'd think they'd give him a little bit of time to settle in. Again, very clearly, he didn't cost them anything. He didn't lose them games. He copped a bit of brunt in the mid-season there where he got dropped, and I was just like, what's going on? So I thought they did him mad dirty, so I'm at least glad to see that he's going to be somewhere that maybe will give him a little bit more time to grow, and I think the Bulldogs have shown themselves to be a club that'll give a lot of chances and a lot of time to some players, so good for him. On Nick Kotrick, look, he was my old big sexy. You want to talk about Jordan Reiki being the new big sexy? I mean, Nick Kotrick's still sexy, but I think the last season and a bit hasn't quite been as effective as he used to be. I know some of the stats don't say that. Some of the stats still have him. And it's like, one of the top tackle breakers, one of the top maybe meters after contact or something like that. But at least to the bar that he set in his first one and a half seasons, an absolute killer. So I think maybe a few teams figured him out. If you don't let him have an impact, he isn't an impact. So I think he didn't set me alight last season. Let's say that much. And I was really surprised that he ended up leaving. And the reason I think that he left is because he wanted to play centre. And the thing that I think the Bulldogs need to stop and think themselves, or Bulldogs fans out there need to stop and ask themselves is, why did we sign him as a centre when Ricky Stewart didn't want him as a centre? And the Raiders tried him as a centre. He doesn't have the defense. He doesn't have the ball skills. So they tried it, and even last season when they needed a centre, desperately, Curtis Scott was out injured, they put Jordan Rapana in there, which ultimately cost them a game or two, I think. But that was how little they thought of Nick Kotrick as a centre. So, great winger, up there with the top wingers. I don't know about centre, and that's why he's gone there for the money that he's gone there for. So buyer beware as far as the Canterbury Bulldogs. Corey Allen's another one that obviously they've got in, and he's another one that is a good signing and has definitely improved their stocks, but not a great signing. I have a big opinion of Corey Allen. I think, again, the Rabbitohs were silly to let him go because he was versatile for them and also single-handedly shored up their games and won them games in the end of last season. So I was really surprised they let him go. I think it came down to the fact that Wayne Bennett even saw him as a starting fullback and they couldn't offer him that with Latrell Mitchell. So it's crazy to let him go, but I guess good in a way that they did. But as far as being a marquee signing and a superstar fullback, I think there's a few little almost a bit of a false narrative there, purely because he got called into the Origin team when the Queensland stocks were super low, and now he's an Origin star, with inverted commas there, and that's why he got the late call up, in 4 days in December or January or whenever it was, all of a sudden had a new contract. So I don't think he's going to be their saviour. I still do think he's going to be a big improvement on who they were running at fullback. Hopoate is not a fullback. Dallin Watene-Lesniak is one of the dumbest NRL players there is. Can be very good, but very dumb. Case in point, when he played the ball towards the opposition goal line. I don't know how that happened, but look, they've brought in those couple guys. They're great. I do really rate a couple of the forwards they've brought in, though. Have you seen these forwards that they've brought?
I mean, again, I don't pretend to know the Bulldogs, but I have seen that they did sign, I think it was Corey Waddell and Jack Hetherington, I believe it is. And I think, or at least from what I've seen and heard, I think Jack Hetherington has got a bit of buzz, a bit of hubbub around him or something like that, doesn't he?
A lot of mongrel. The man is a maniac. I believe he's spent a lot of time on the sidelines in his very short career so far. But when he isn't getting himself suspended, a very strong guy. I believe he's from NRL Credence too. His dad was a famous NRL player from a number of years ago as well, Jason Hetherington. So he's from a good NRL family and is a big body. So I think he's going to be a good addition.
Well, yeah, and I think with the Dogs, it's we'd be remiss without mentioning that they obviously have Josh Adokar coming into the team in 2022, and obviously that doesn't really impact them this season, but it certainly would maybe make some of the signings that they've made make a little bit more sense. And what I'm thinking as well with Corey Allen is that I think that's a great signing because it's even though they've definitely bought high on him, right? Just come off an Origin series win, playing fullback. Did he look that great in the Origin game? Not really, but Origin's a completely different game. He did enough. The pass that he had a couple of passes. I think 2 were dropped for sure tries, but he is very good at the line. Has a very neat that little that tap pass is almost invented now where you don't really hard to do with microphone, but you don't really catch it. It's more just you sort of bring it across your body. Very hard to do. He's very good at that. But to me, that what does that mean for 2022? Because at least from what a lot of reports have been hearing is that Adokar wants to play fullback. And I'm pretty sure as well his family is still located in Sydney, so he wants to is moving there in 2022 for that. But he also wants to play fullback. I think he was pretty aware that with Lil Puppy now, cementing his spot in the Storm #1 jersey, that was never going to happen. Corey Allen's one strength, one of the things that he's very, very good at is that tap pass. That completely goes away if he's sitting on the wing. But then, you look you almost sort of brought up with Nick Kotrick earlier, is I'm of the sound mindset that good teams build their spine first. They look to get their halves, look to get a hooker, and look to get a damaging second rower or a dominant front rower. And obviously he's an outlier, but a Jason Taumalolo or something like that. What the good teams also do is they understand that wingers are very easy to come by in the sense that as long as they are fast and as long as they're willing to run the ball up hard and they can finish, you're going to be doing all right as a winger, right? You look at someone the great wingers of our time, and at least in the last half a decade or a decade, you're talking Blake Ferguson, he's probably been one of the top guys there, a Brett Morris, these sorts of guys where you don't I wouldn't and you shouldn't be paying Nick Kotrick, what is he on, 850? 900, something like that. I'm not paying Cameron Munster, Jonathan Thurston money for a winger or a center because their impact in the game is so limited. What's the word I'm looking for here? Fluctuational. Is that even a word? It fluctuates with how the game goes. So if you're a winger, an opposing halfback, if you're a right side winger, can just kick to the left. Nullifies you out of the play. If you're the winger on the one side and teams are trying to go sweeping plays, you just rush up early on the winger and you force the center inside of them to go to work. And then if it's the center and Kotrick's playing there, you rush up on Kotrick and you try to take him away. Halves, hookers, fullbacks, and your second rowers or your props, the ones that are sort of in the middle of the field, they're the ones that are always going to be seeing the ball either in their hands or close to people around them that they can impact the game. Wingers and centers, I think the Raiders did a good choice because they know, hey, all we really need is just a guy that's fast. Don't even necessarily need to break tackles. It's just
are you fast? Can you finish? And will you do some hard yards for us? Like, that's literally all a winger needs to be. Jordan Rapana is pretty much a one-trick pony, but he fucking runs hard and he gives it a good crack. And yeah, he drops the ball sometimes, and like, you know, has a few like brain lapses, but you know, so did Joey Leilua. And like, you guys only did go to a grand final with those two on one side, like Leopana. Like, you don't need to be paying that type of money for those top guys. And I think that's going to be the thing for the Bulldogs this year, is what happens when Adokar's money gets onto the books, and they're looking at getting Brandon Smith. Apparently, like, there's been chat, they've been like trying to get him to come over there as well. That's a lot of money. And like, salary cap, you look at what's happening with the Panthers right now. You get some young guys playing really well that are underpaid. What happens when they all need to be paid? Well, you know, like, and he's even at the moment, don't the Bulldogs have
yes, he is. Oh shit, I forgot about that one. I mean, we're not talking about 2022 at the moment, but yeah, that is definitely one to keep in mind.
So again, that's like, where does Corey Allen like fit, and where does Kotrick fit into all this? And like, it's all well and good to have the show ponies on the outside, but you know, if you don't have forwards that are willing to, and that's the thing, if you don't have forwards that are not getting over the advantage line, defending hard, like making them like kick early or kick under pressure and duress, then your halves are under pressure, because then they're the ones that are being hustled and harried like at the end of sets, and are having to do like so much like off of like a standing start or off the back foot, and then your backs are essentially out of the play. Like, the Storm for years have made their money purely on having a good forward pack, the greatest hooker of all time. That's, you know, neither here nor there. And like, just guys, I feel like Will Chambers doesn't fill you up with optimism, but just did his job. Like, Dane Nielsen did his job. Like, even look at the Roosters. Like, they refuse to pay Latrell Mitchell. And it's like, they've got Joseph Manu on decent money, but then they pick up Brett and Josh Morris off like for peanuts. You know what I mean? They've got bloody Alphabet. I can't remember his name. He scored 5 tries in a game either last year or the year before, but never heard from him after that, because it's just anybody can just like play wing in this day and age of footy now. Like, you just like, Charlie Staines comes on for the Panthers and scores 4. Like,
yeah, look, and mark my words, Nick Kotrick will be back on the wing before the end of this season, because he's a winger. And at the very least, he's going back there in 2022, because, to your point, I didn't even think of this, Josh Adokar is playing fullback. That's why he went to the Bulldogs. So if Josh Adokar's going to fullback, Corey Allen needs to go somewhere else. Corey Allen is at least a better ball player and defender and all-round player than a couple of the other Bulldogs players. So he's going to go centers. So it's going to be Josh Adokar at fullback. The 2 centers will then become Hopewade and Allen, at which point you've got Kotrick going back to the wing. That is 100%.
And like, he's not a bad winger to have, but not for 800, 900 fucking K. Like, you're laughing. Like, the Broncos have like been paying Corey Oates about $750,000 a year for the last 3 or 4 years, and like, I love Corey Oates, and he's a good player, but just the money just isn't there for not what they offer, but what other players can offer them. Like, you can find a guy like a Brett Morris or a Josh Morris, like towards the end of their career, that are maybe looking to just, you know, try to win a premiership, and will like go there on a discount because they've already played like, you know, so much footy for so many years. Or you go to your juniors, you pick up, if you're the Panthers, you pick up Charlie Staines, you know what I mean, and he gets you 4 tries in the first game. I think he had at one point 6 tries in, you know, 2 games, or 6 tries in fucking less than 160 minutes played, or something outrageous. Like, there's I hate the term specialist winger. Like, they're always like, oh, like, he's a specialist winger. It's like, the only guys that like I would really, because like, and it's not a specialist winger, but like top tier wingers, I would say is Josh Adokar and Josh Adokar. And the only reason why I'd call him a, in quotations, specialist winger is because he is really, really, really fucking fast. Like, he's the only guy that I would consider putting on the wing and spending close to $1 million on while he's still that fast. It'll drop off eventually. Like, every sporting athlete, at some point that speed goes away. But while it's still there, because like, you can take Kotrick out of the game all you want. Josh Adokar, he's just quick.
The scariest part about Josh Adokar is just how fucking big he's getting in addition. Like, he's been quick, and he's really mastered. He's become a specialist winger. He has. And then he got massive. He's so big now. So add that size, and shoring up that part of his game where, like, if he does come up against somebody, one-on-one near the goal line, in the corner post, now he can run over you. Or if you do need him inside your 10, he can run around you or run through you. Like, it's fucking scary. Like, he's the best winger in the game without a doubt. And then it's Daylight second, and then there's a big clump of people, Nick Kotrick being among them. Yeah, look, I think there's a lot that is going to happen for the Bulldogs in 2022. 2021's a step in that right direction. Of course, the other big in for them is Trent Barrett, another of the bottom tier teams like the Broncos that have brought in a new coach that is hopefully going to save the day. By all accounts, he's well liked in the dressing sheds and a very smart guy. In saying that, he's been a head coach before and that didn't work out super well, so we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, the X factor, a coach can't be one, so the X factor for me has got to be Kyle Flanagan. If he can get comfortable in his new position and finally be the stalwart that they need in the halves, maybe they can see some more success. In saying that, I think if the Bulldogs cop another couple of L's early in the season, I think his confidence suffers, and it's more of the same. It's another of the same for the Bulldogs. So for me, I think, look, not enough game changes to do much better, so I still see them probably dead last. I don't see them moving anywhere else but dead last.
Have them below the Broncos. I like that. I like that a lot. Look, I'm gonna take the positive Pete side for the Bulldogs. I think you took the negative Nelly. I think the experience that Flanagan got with the Roosters, I think there's something to be said about that system. As much as I hate them, Trent Robinson is easily one of the greatest rugby league minds of our generation. I see Flanagan doing really well. I see him as the type of guy that, while might struggle to be motivated at times, I think he's got a really big fire under his ass now. I think we'll get, as we go through these teams more and more, we'll start to sort of understand where I'm thinking. I reckon there's going to be a very big gap between my top 8 and top 10. I think are going to be a fairly big distance away from the bottom 5, but I have the Bulldogs to finish 11th. I think they're going to be like, from contenders to pretenders, I have the Bulldogs finishing around that 11th position this year. And I think that it's going to flow very well into them next year. It really, and like I said, I think the X factor is Kyle Flanagan, but I also think as well, I think the X factor is Trent Barrett continuing where they were last year in terms of they were always fighting for each other. They were always in every single game. And even when they were getting belted by, the Storm by, I think it was like 44-12. One thing I will say, that unbelievable try off the scrum at the end of the game that Addo Carr scored, there were still 2 players from the Bulldogs that were chasing him the whole way. And like, you're chasing down Josh Addo-Carr. Like, the only reason why you're doing that is to send a message to the rest of the players and to yourself as well, because you're not catching Josh Addo-Carr. It's just the only way that he doesn't score a try then is if he drops it, and he's not going to, they still had that dig, they had that energy to do it. So I think, if that can happen, I think it will. The Dogs will finish 11th, but I still think they'll be a fair distance away from the top teams.
Yeah, a bit of difference there between our 2 picks. So we'll definitely make sure that we clarify our full ladder at the end of our preseason series, so we can keep track of that and see how it performs come season's end. Bloody hell, I'll be very surprised if I see him at 11th. All right, that's the end of our episode for this week. Thanks as always for listening. If you're here with us, you have a really serious rugby league problem, and for that, we thank you.
We release our episodes weekly, where we preview and review every single game in the National Rugby League and also deep dive into some of the bigger issues affecting rugby league. If you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you left us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Google. We've left a link in the description below this podcast, and even better if you could share this podcast with a friend or a family member. If you have a question you'd like to ask us or you really disagree with anything we've said, leave it in the comments section. We'll respond to every question, and if we don't, I'll buy you a beer.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and hit the subscribe and notify buttons on your favorite platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
For now, that's it from us. See you next week for our second week in the preview for preseason. Smell you later.